A young woman dates an elderly man, interested in his inheritance. However, when the will is read, she is stunned by what she receives. In the narrow streets of a poor neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia, Lily Anderson, at 20 years old, stood out like a flower amid decay. Her beauty contrasted sharply with the harsh realities surrounding her, a childhood marked by an absent, addicted mother, an unknown father, and a negligent, alcoholic grandmother who barely cared for her. Working as a waitress at a local diner, Lily dreamed of a better life. During breaks, she would flip through fashion magazines, imagining herself far from her current life. Her co-workers, Mary and Rose, alternated between supporting and doubting her dreams. One day, "I'll be in these pages," Lily would say, determined. At night, returning home, Lily passed through dark alleys, avoiding her ex-boyfriend Matt and his group. She knew that path could have led her to crime. At home, she would find her grandmother asleep, an empty bottle by her side. Lily would cover her up, feeling a mix of love and resentment. In the small room she shared with her grandmother, Lily dreamed of a different life, promising herself that one day she would leave, no matter the cost. A busy morning at the local diner brought a surprise. Edward Smith, a well-known millionaire, was there. Lily saw her chance and offered to serve him. "Good morning, sir. What would you like to order?" she asked, with a rehearsed smile. Edward, captivated by her beauty, ordered coffee and accepted her suggestion of pancakes. During the meal, Lily stayed nearby, attentive and charming. At the end, Edward accidentally dropped a few coins. As she helped him pick them up, their hands touched. "I'd love to come back here tomorrow, maybe around your lunchtime," he suggested. Lily's heart raced. This was her chance. "It would be an honor," she replied. The next day, during lunch, Edward talked about his luxurious life. Lily listened, fascinated, imagining herself in that world. "You're a fascinating young woman, Lily," said Edward. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere more appropriate?" Lily accepted, knowing that her life was about to change. The most upscale restaurant in Savannah was like a dream for Lily. Crystal chandeliers, silver cutlery, soft music. Edward ordered the best for her, talking about art, music, and exotic places. In the following days, he took her to museums, concerts, and galleries. Every experience was new and exciting for Lily. At a museum, standing in front of a famous painting, she felt tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see something like this," she said, emotional. Edward embraced her, touched. "There's so much beauty in the world, Lily. And I want to show it all to you." But not everything was perfect. Lily noticed disapproving looks and heard nasty comments about her being a gold digger. Edward took her to visit his charity foundation, showing how money could be used for good. Lily was impressed, never having thought about money in that way. At night, in her room, Lily reflected on her new life. The luxury, the culture, Edward's kindness, it all made her see the world differently. But looking at her sleeping grandmother, she remembered where she came from. "It's just a plan," she whispered to herself. "I can't get attached." But as she danced with Edward at a gala, dressed like a princess, Lily allowed herself to dream. What if she could really belong to this world? What if Edward was more than just a plan? While Lily was living her fairy tale with Edward, a dark cloud was approaching. James, Edward's only son, was returning from a long business trip. He knew nothing about his father's new girlfriend, and the news caught him by surprise. It was a sunny Sunday when James arrived at the Smith mansion. Edward and Lily were in the garden, laughing and talking, when James's car pulled through the gates. "Dad!" James called out, stepping out of the car with a smile. But his smile froze when he saw Lily. Edward stood up, excited. "James, my son. It's so good to see you. Come, I want you to meet someone special." Lily stood up, nervous. She knew how important this moment was. "James, this is Lily, my girlfriend," Edward said, his eyes gleaming with affection. James looked from his father to Lily, clearly shocked. Lily was young, beautiful, and obviously from a different social class. "Girlfriend?" James repeated, incredulous. Dad, she's young enough to be your daughter. Edward frowned. James, please. Don't be rude. Lily extended her hand, trying to be polite. It's a pleasure to meet you, James. Your father speaks very highly of you. James shook her hand briefly, his gaze cold. I'm sure he does. The lunch that followed was tense. James barely touched his food, watching Lily's every move with suspicion. He asked questions about her family, her work, her past. Every answer Lily gave seemed to deepen his distrust. So, Lily, James said, his tone falsely casual, how exactly did you meet my father? Lily swallowed hard. I was a waitress at the diner your father frequented. James raised an eyebrow. Interesting. And you don't work there anymore? James, that's enough, Edward interrupted. Lily is studying now. I insisted that she focus on her education. After lunch, James asked to speak with his father privately. Lily stayed in the garden, her stomach in knots. In the office, James couldn't contain his concern. Dad, can't you see what's happening? She's obviously after your money. Edward sighed. Son, I understand your concern. But Lily is different. She makes me happy. She's half your age. James exclaimed. How can you trust her? I love her, Edward said simply. And I hope you can accept that. But James was not convinced. In the days that followed, he discreetly began investigating Lily's past. He hired a private detective to dig into every detail of her life. Lily, on the other hand, felt the weight of James's gaze every time she visited the mansion. She tried to be polite, even friendly, but James kept a wall of ice between them. One night, during dinner, James dropped a bombshell. Lily, is it true that you've been arrested for theft? Lily froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Edward looked shocked at his son. I was young, Lily stammered. I made mistakes. James, how dare you? Edward was furious. But James continued. And your ex-boyfriend, Matt? Do you still have contact with him? Lily felt the blood drain from her face. How did he know about Matt? Edward slammed his hand on the table. That's enough. James, to my office, now. As father and son argued in the office, Lily fought back tears. Her past was coming back to haunt her, threatening to destroy everything she had gained. In the office, the discussion was heated. You're investigating Lily? Edward asked, incredulous. Someone needs to protect you, since you won't protect yourself. James replied. Edward shook his head, disappointed. Son, I understand your concern. But Lily is part of my life now. You need to accept that. James left the office furious, casting a cold look at Lily as he passed. That night, alone in her room at the mansion, Lily cried. She knew her plan was in danger. James was a threat she hadn't anticipated. But at the same time, a part of her felt guilty. Edward had defended her with so much love and trust. Did she deserve it? Lily fell asleep with these doubts, knowing that the battle with James was far from over. She would need to be smarter, more careful. Her future depended on it. As the days passed, Lily found herself increasingly entangled in Edward's life. What had begun as a cold and calculated plan to secure a better life was slowly turning into something deeper and unexpected. One sunny afternoon, Edward took Lily on a picnic in the park. He had prepared everything personally, something Lily never imagined a wealthy man would do. You made these sandwiches yourself? Lily asked, surprised. Edward laughed. Of course. I thought it would be more special this way. I like taking care of the people I love. The word love made Lily's heart skip a beat. She found herself smiling without realizing it. As they ate and talked, Lily noticed how Edward's eyes sparkled when he spoke about his passions, art, music, literature. She found herself fascinated not just by what he said, but by how he said it. His enthusiasm was contagious. You know, Lily, Edward said, taking her hand, you've brought a light into my life that I didn't know was missing. Lily felt a lump in her throat. The guilt for her original motives was consuming her. Edward, Shoo, he interrupted her gently. You don't need to say anything. I just want you to know how much you mean to me. That night, lying in her bed at the mansion, Lily couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were a mess. On one hand, she still saw Edward as her ticket to a better life. But on the other, she couldn't deny that she was developing real feelings for him. What am I doing? She whispered to herself in the darkness. In the days that followed, Lily found herself eager to see Edward, not for what he could give her, but simply for his company. She laughed at his jokes, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely found them funny. Listening to his stories had become a pleasure, not a burden. One night, during a romantic dinner, Edward surprised Lily with a gift, a beautiful pearl necklace. It's gorgeous, Lily said, moved. Not as beautiful as you, Edward replied, placing the necklace around her neck. In that moment, looking into Edward's eyes, Lily felt something she had never felt before. It wasn't greed or ambition. It was something purer, something scarier. Later, in her room, Lily looked at her reflection in the mirror, touching the necklace. She no longer saw the poor girl with a plan. She saw a woman confused, torn between what she wanted and what she was beginning to feel. This wasn't part of the plan, she murmured to herself. Lily's internal conflict grew with each passing day. She found herself doing things for Edward without thinking about reward, small gestures of affection, genuine concern for his well-being. One morning, seeing Edward stressed with work, Lily prepared his favorite coffee and brought it to him in the office. You didn't have to do this, he said, surprised and touched. I wanted to, Lily replied, realizing it was true. Edward pulled her into a hug, and Lily allowed herself to melt into his arms. For a moment, she forgot all her plans and simply enjoyed the feeling of being there with him. But reality always returned to haunt her. At night, alone, Lily wrestled with her conflicting feelings. The original plan was still there, in the back of her mind. But now, there was something else. Something she hadn't planned for, something that scared her. Am I really falling in love? Lily asked herself, looking out the window at the starry Savannah night. The answer to that question terrified her. Because if it was yes, everything would become much more complicated. And Lily didn't know if she was ready to deal with that. The sun was setting over Savannah, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lily was restless, pacing back and forth in her room at the Smith mansion. Edward had left for an unexpected business trip, leaving her alone with her confused thoughts and James's watchful eye. Deciding she needed some fresh air, Lily headed downstairs to the garden. To her surprise, she found James sitting on the terrace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Good evening, Lily, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Missing my father? Lily hesitated but decided to try making peace once again. James, why can't we get along? For your father's sake? James laughed humorlessly. For his sake? Is that what you tell yourself at night? That you're doing this for his sake? James's words hit her like a slap. Part of her knew he was right, that her initial intentions weren't pure. But another part, the part that was developing real feelings for Edward, rebelled. You don't know me, Lily said, her voice trembling with emotion. You don't know what I feel for your father. James stood up, stepping closer to her. His eyes shone with a mix of anger and something else, something Lily couldn't quite identify. Then tell me, Lily, he whispered, dangerously close. What do you really feel? The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Lily could feel the heat from James's body, the scent of his expensive cologne. Her heart was racing, a mix of fear and an attraction she didn't want to admit. I love your father, she stammered, but the words felt empty even to her own ears. James took another step forward, cornering Lily against the wall. Liar, he murmured. What happened next was a blur of emotions and sensations. One moment, they were staring at each other, full of anger and defiance. The next, their lips met in a furious, passionate kiss. Lily knew it was wrong, that she should stop, but her body wouldn't obey. James's hands on her waist, his lips on her neck, it all felt so right and so wrong at the same time. They stumbled inside, never breaking contact, until they reached James's bedroom. Clothes were torn off, falling to the floor like the last barriers of her resistance. In the darkness of the room, Lily gave in to a passion she hadn't known existed within her. Every touch, every kiss was like fire on her skin. It was different from anything she had ever experienced with Edward. It was intense, forbidden, and irresistible. Hours later, lying in James's bed, reality began to sink in for Lily. What had she done? How could she betray Edward like this? And with his own son? Beside her, James seemed equally disturbed. The alcohol had worn off, leaving only guilt and regret. This should never have happened, he said, his voice hoarse. Lily nodded, unable to find the words. Silently, she got up and began to dress, her hands trembling. Lily, James called as she was about to leave the room. What are we going to do now? She turned, tears in her eyes. Nothing. This never happened, understand? Never. James nodded, a mix of relief and disappointment in his eyes. Back in her own room, Lily collapsed on the bed, sobbing. How could she do this? How could she let herself be swept away like that? She thought of Edward, of his kindness, of his love for her. The guilt consumed her. But there was something else, something that scared her even more than the guilt. Deep down, a small voice told her that despite everything, she had enjoyed it. The passion, the intensity with James, it was something she had never felt before. Lily spent the night tossing and turning, tormented by her thoughts. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, one that could cost her everything she had gained. But the worst part was that she didn't know if she could prevent it from happening again. When the sun finally rose, Lily had made a decision. She needed to distance herself, to create space between her and James. For Edward's sake, for everyone's sake, she needed to bury that night deep in her memory and pretend it never happened. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, preparing for another day, Lily knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The image of the innocent girl that Edward believed her to be had shattered. In her place stood a woman confused, guilty, and scared. Lily walked through the streets of Savannah, trying to forget the night with James. The hot afternoon sun couldn't warm the coldness she felt inside. Suddenly, a familiar voice made her freeze. Well, if it isn't little Princess Lily. She turned around and saw Matt, her ex-boyfriend, leaning against a nearby wall. His malicious smile made Lily shiver. What do you want, Matt? She asked, trying to sound strong. Matt stepped closer, the smell of cigarettes invading Lily's space. I heard you're swimming in money now. Thought you might want to share some of that luck with an old friend. Lily took a step back. I have nothing for you. Leave me alone. But Matt wasn't going to give up easily. He grabbed Lily's arm, pulling her close. Come on, sweetheart. I know you're stringing along that rich old man. How about giving me a cut of the loot? Panic took hold of Lily. What if Edward found out about her past? What if Matt told him everything? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to pull away. Let go of me. Matt laughed. Oh, you don't? Well, I bet your sugar daddy would love to hear about our little adventures. Remember that shop we robbed? Or the car we borrowed? Lily's heart sank. She knew Matt wasn't bluffing. Her past was coming back to haunt her, threatening to destroy everything she had built. What do you want? She asked, defeated. Matt's smile widened. Now we're talking the same language. I want money, and I want a lot of it. You've got 1 week to bring me $50,000. If you don't, I'll pay a visit to your old man and tell him everything. Lily felt the world spinning. Where would she get that much money? How would she explain it to Edward? 1 week, sweetheart, Matt said, letting go of her arm. Don't be late. As she watched Matt walk away, Lily felt the weight of her past choices. She had tried so hard to leave that life behind, but now everything was falling apart. In the days that followed, Lily was a bundle of nerves. Every time the phone rang, she feared it was Matt. Every look from Edward made her feel guilty. And James. Well, she could hardly look at him without remembering that night. Lily tried everything to get the money. She sold the jewelry Edward had given her, asked for an advance on the job she pretended to have, and even considered stealing. But nothing came close to the amount Matt demanded. The night before the deadline, Lily was desperate. Sitting in the mansion's garden, she cried silently. How had she let things get to this point? Lily? What's wrong? It was Edward. He sat down beside her, concern in his kind eyes. For a moment, Lily considered telling him everything. About Matt, about her past, about her fears. But the fear of losing everything stopped her. It's nothing, she lied, forcing a smile. I'm just tired. Edward hugged her, and Lily felt even worse. How could she keep deceiving someone so good? The next morning, the day of Matt's deadline, Lily woke up early. She knew she didn't have the money. She knew her past was about to be revealed. All she could do was wait and pray for a miracle. As she looked in the mirror, Lily barely recognized the woman she saw. Where was the confident girl who thought she could fool the world? Now, all she saw was fear and regret. It was 10 a.m. when the doorbell rang. Lily's heart stopped. Was it Matt? Had he come to tell Edward everything? With trembling steps, she walked down the stairs. Each second felt like an eternity. When she reached the door, she took a deep breath and opened it, ready to face her fate. Lily opened the door, her heart pounding. To her relief, it wasn't Matt but a delivery woman with a package for Edward. She signed for it with trembling hands, silently thanking the small reprieve from her impending doom. Closing the door, Lily leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The day had barely begun, and she already felt exhausted. Then, a wave of nausea hit her, forcing her to run to the nearest bathroom. As she recovered, a terrible idea began to form in her mind. How long had it been since her last period? With all the stress of the past few weeks, she hadn't even noticed the delay. No, 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 Lily murmured to herself in panic. This can't be happening. With shaky legs, she went to the nearest pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. Back in her room at the mansion, Lily took the test with trembling hands, praying it would be negative. The minutes of waiting felt like an eternity. Lily paced back and forth, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What if she was pregnant? Whose baby would it be? Edward's or James's? When the alarm on her phone rang, signaling that the time had passed, Lily almost didn't have the courage to look at the result. With her heart in her throat, she picked up the test. Positive. The word seemed to scream at her. Lily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Lily let the tears fall freely. How could this happen? Amid all the confusion with Matt, the night with James, her conflicting feelings for Edward, now this? The question that tormented her the most was, whose baby was it? The dates blurred in her mind. Could it be Edward's, the man who treated her with so much love and respect? Or was it James's, the result of that night of forbidden passion? Lily felt nauseous again, but this time, it wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the weight of her choices, of her lies, crashing down on her like an avalanche. What am I going to do? She whispered to the empty room, her hand instinctively going to her still flat belly. At that moment, a knock on the door startled her. Lily? Are you okay? You've been missing all day, it was Edward's concerned voice. Quickly, Lily hid the pregnancy test and tried to dry her tears. Just a moment, she called, her voice trembling. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lily tried to compose herself. She couldn't tell Edward. Not yet. Not when she didn't even know what to think or feel. Opening the door, she forced a smile. Sorry, I was resting. I think I caught a cold. Edward looked at her with concern, placing a hand on her forehead. You're a little warm. Do you want me to call a doctor? The mention of a doctor made Lily panic again. No, no. I just need some rest. Edward nodded, not entirely convinced. All right, dear. Rest well. If you need anything, just call. When he left, Lily closed the door and slid down to the floor, tears flowing once more. The reality of her situation hit her like a train. She was pregnant, possibly with her stepson's child, being blackmailed by her criminal ex-boyfriend, and lying to the man who loved her unconditionally. In the days that followed, Lily lived in a constant state of anxiety. Every look from Edward made her feel guilty. Every time she crossed paths with James in the mansion's corridors, her heart raced. And Matt's threat still loomed over her head. She knew she had to make a decision. Tell the truth? But which truth? And to whom? The thought of losing everything she had gained, of returning to poverty, terrified her. But the weight of the lies was becoming unbearable. One morning, while having breakfast with Edward, Lily almost let it slip. Seeing him smile at her with so much love, she felt the words on the tip of her tongue. "Edward, I need to tell you something." But before she could continue, Edward's phone rang. It was an important work call. The moment passed, and with it, Lily's courage. That night, alone in her room, Lily stroked her belly, speaking softly to the baby growing inside her. "What are we going to do, little one? How am I going to tell them about you? How will I find out who your father is?" The questions went unanswered, echoing in the silence of the room. Lily knew she couldn't hide the pregnancy forever. Soon, her body would start to show the changes. Soon, everyone would know. With this realization, Lily made a decision. She had to find out who the baby's father was before the truth came out. Only then could she decide her next step. But how to do it without raising suspicion? How to get a DNA test without Edward or James finding out? As the sun rose over Savannah, Lily was still awake, her mind working on a plan. A plan that, she hoped, could save her from the tangled web of lies and secrets she had woven around herself. Summer in Savannah was at its peak, but inside the Smith mansion, an invisible chill had settled. Edward, always so full of life and energy, began showing signs of fatigue and weakness that didn't go unnoticed by Lily. One sunny morning, Lily found Edward in the library, his hand trembling slightly as he held a book. He tried to hide it, but Lily noticed. "Edward, are you all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. He forced a smile. "Of course, dear. Just a little tired." But Lily wasn't convinced. In the days that followed, she watched him closely. Edward tired more easily, sometimes lost his balance, and his skin seemed paler than usual. One night during dinner, the worst happened. Edward was in the middle of telling a story when suddenly, his speech slurred, and he dropped his wine glass. His eyes went unfocused for a moment before he collapsed, falling from his chair. "Edward!" Lily screamed, rushing to his side. "Someone call an ambulance." The hours at the hospital were the longest of Lily's life. Sitting in the waiting room, she found herself torn between genuine concern for Edward and fear of what would happen if he didn't get better. What would become of her? Of the baby? James arrived shortly after, his face a mask of worry. When his eyes met Lily's, there was a moment of tension, a reminder of that night they both tried to forget. "How is he?" James asked, his voice rough. "We don't know yet," Lily replied, avoiding his gaze. The hours dragged on. Finally, a doctor appeared, his face serious. "Family of Mr. Smith?" Lily and James stood up immediately. "Mr. Smith has suffered a mild stroke," the doctor explained. "We were able to stabilize him, but he will need constant care from now on." The news hit like a bombshell. A stroke. Edward, always so strong and vital, was now fragile and vulnerable. In the days that followed, the mansion's routine changed completely. Nurses came and went, medical equipment was installed, and a heavy silence hung over the house. Lily devoted herself entirely to caring for Edward. She spent hours by his bedside, reading to him, helping him with physical therapy exercises, always with an encouraging smile on her face. But inside, she was conflicted. Seeing Edward so frail stirred genuine feelings of affection and concern in her. At the same time, fear of the future consumed her. What if he didn't recover? What if he found out about the baby? One afternoon, while helping Edward walk through the garden, he suddenly stopped, looking at her with tired but loving eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice weak, "I don't know what I would do without you." Lily's heart tightened. The guilt she felt was almost unbearable. Here was this man, trusting her completely, while she kept secrets that could destroy him. "Don't say that," she replied, fighting back tears. "You're going to be fine. You're going to get better." Edward smiled sadly. "Maybe. But if something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of James. You two are all I have." Lily felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The mention of James, Edward's trust in her, the weight of her secrets, it all hit her at once. I promise," she whispered, knowing it was yet another promise she wasn't sure she could keep. That night, alone in her room, Lily cried like she hadn't cried in years. The situation had become too complicated. Edward was sick, a baby was on the way, James, mad, everything seemed to be falling apart around her. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lily barely recognized the woman she saw. Where was the ambitious girl who came to the mansion with a plan? Now, all she saw was a scared woman, lost in a labyrinth of lies and conflicting emotions. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to her reflection, knowing there was no easy answer. With Edward's health in decline, Lily knew she had to make a decision. Tell the truth? Continue with the lies? Run away? Each option seemed worse than the last. But one thing was certain, time was running out. Soon, all her secrets would come to light, whether she wanted them to or not. Edward's health deteriorated with each passing day. The doctors, with grave expressions, spoke in hushed tones with James in the mansion's corridors. Lily watched everything with a heavy heart, torn between genuine concern and fear of an uncertain future. One particularly difficult night, Edward took a sudden turn for the worse. Nurses rushed about, and the family doctor was called urgently. Lily and James waited in the corridor, the silence between them heavy as lead. "He wants to see you both," the doctor said, emerging from the room with a somber expression. "One at a time, please." James gestured for Lily to go first. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. As she entered the room, the sight of Edward so fragile and pale in the enormous bed nearly made her break down. "Lily, my love," Edward called, his voice barely a whisper. She approached, taking his hand gently. "I'm here," she said, forcing a smile through the tears threatening to fall. "I know I don't have much time," Edward began, making Lily grip his hand in protest. "No, dear, don't deny it. I can feel it. But before I go, I need to tell you something." Lily held her breath, fearing what he might say next. "I know I wasn't your first love," he continued. "I know I'm too old, that maybe you came to me with other motives at first. But I want you to know that the love I feel for you is real, and I hope that, over time, you've learned to love me too." Edward's words were like daggers to Lily's heart. The guilt she felt was almost unbearable. "Edward, she began, but he interrupted her. "Let me finish, please. I don't have much time." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I changed my will. I've left a significant portion to you, Lily. I want you and the baby to have a secure future." Lily froze. Baby?" she stammered, in shock. Edward smiled weakly. "Yes, dear. I noticed. The nausea, your mood swings. I'm old, but I'm not a fool. I know I'm going to be a father again, even if I'm not here to see it." The tears Lily had been holding back finally fell. Edward's kindness, his trust in her, it was too much. She didn't deserve any of it. "Edward, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. But before she could continue, Edward had a fit of coughing. Alarmed, Lily called for the nurses. In the confusion that followed, she was gently pushed out of the room. In the corridor, Lily found James, who looked at her with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "What happened in there?" he asked. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. How could she explain? How could she tell the truth now? Hours passed. Edward was stabilized, but the doctors warned that the end was near. Lily couldn't sleep, tormented by guilt and fear. She knew she needed to tell the truth, but how could she do it now, when Edward was so fragile? The next morning, Edward asked to see Lily again. This time, she was determined to tell him everything, no matter the consequences. "Edward," she began as soon as she entered the room. "There's something I need to tell you." He smiled weakly, gesturing for her to come closer. "I know, dear. You want to tell me about the baby." Lily took a deep breath. It was now or never. "It's not just about the baby. It's about everything. I'm not who you think I am. When we met, I had a plan. I wanted..." But before she could finish, Edward raised his hand, silencing her. "Lily, my love. I know. I've always known." Lily's mouth fell open. "You knew?" Edward nodded slowly. "Of course I did. I'm old, but I'm not naive. I knew you came to me with ulterior motives. But you know what? I don't care. Because over time, I saw you change. I saw you become the wonderful woman you are today. And that, to me, is what matters." Edward's words were like a balm to Lily's tormented soul. But there was still more, much more, that she needed to say. "But Edward, there's more. The baby." At that moment, Edward had another coughing fit. The monitors began beeping frantically. Nurses and doctors rushed into the room, pushing Lily aside. In the corridor, she found James again. Their eyes met, filled with shared fear and guilt. At that moment, Lily knew she couldn't keep hiding the truth. No matter what happened to Edward, she had to tell everything. To James, to herself, and to the baby growing inside her. As the doctors fought to stabilize Edward, Lily made her decision. As soon as all of this was over, she would tell the whole truth. No matter the consequences. It was time to face reality, no matter how painful it might be. Edward's funeral was a solemn ceremony, attended by many important people from Savannah. Lily stood beside James, both dressed in black, their faces marked by the grief and exhaustion of the past days. After the burial, a heavy silence fell over the Smith mansion. Lily felt lost, guilty, and afraid of the uncertain future that awaited her. She knew the moment of truth was coming. 3 days after the funeral, the family lawyer, Mr. Donahue, called a meeting for the reading of the will. Lily entered the mansion's library with her heart racing. James was already there, sitting stiffly in a leather armchair. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Donahue began, adjusting his glasses. "We are here for the reading of Edward Smith's will. I ask that you listen carefully." Lily held her breath as the lawyer opened the sealed envelope. "I, Edward Smith, being of sound mind and body, declare this to be my last will and testament," Mr. Donahue read. What followed was a list of small bequests to staff members and charitable institutions. James listened impatiently, waiting to hear about his inheritance. Lily, on the other hand, could barely concentrate, her stomach turning with nerves. Finally, Mr. Donahue reached the main part of the will. "To my son, James Smith, I leave 30% of my shares in the company and the summer house in the Hamptons." James frowned, clearly surprised and somewhat disappointed with his portion. "And to Lily Anderson," the lawyer continued, making Lily hold her breath, "I leave the responsibility of managing my charitable foundation, Hope for All, with a generous annual salary to cover her expenses." Lily blinked, confused. This wasn't what Edward had mentioned on his deathbed. Where was the significant portion he had said he left for her and the baby? "The remainder of my estate," Mr. Donahue went on, "including the mansion and the majority of the company shares, will be placed in a trust. This trust will be jointly managed by James and Lily, with the condition that they use the resources to expand the work of the Hope for All Foundation." A stunned silence filled the room. James looked at Lily with a mix of shock and anger. Lily, for her part, could hardly believe what she was hearing. "There is one more thing," Mr. Donahue said, clearing his throat. Edward left a letter to be read at this time. The lawyer opened another envelope and began to read. "My dear James and Lily, if you are hearing this, it means I have already left this world. I hope you understand my decisions. James, my son, I know you expected to inherit everything, but I believe this arrangement will help you grow and become the man I know you can be. Lily, my love, I know you are expecting a child. I also know there are secrets between the two of you that need to be resolved. This is my way of ensuring that you work together, for the sake of the child and the legacy I leave behind. I ask that you use this opportunity to set things right, to be honest with each other and with yourselves. The Hope for All Foundation has always been my greatest pride. Now, it is in your hands to make it something even greater. With love, Edward Smith. When Mr. Donahue finished reading, the silence in the room was deafening. Lily felt tears streaming down her face, a mix of gratitude, guilt, and fear of the future. James abruptly stood up, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Without saying a word, he left the room, slamming the door behind him. Lily remained there, stunned, as Mr. Donahue gathered the documents. Edward's will was nothing like what she had expected. There was no immediate fortune, no easy way out. Instead, there was responsibility, a challenge, and the clear expectation that she and James would resolve their issues. As she left the library, Lily knew that a new phase of her life was beginning. A phase that would require honesty, courage, and, above all, the strength to face the consequences of her past actions. The sun had barely risen over Savannah when Lily arrived at the headquarters of the Hope for All Foundation. It was her first day as the administrator, and she was nervous. The building, though not luxurious, was very different from the diner where she used to work. "Good morning, Miss Anderson," the secretary greeted her. "Mr. Smith spoke very highly of you." Lily forced a smile, the guilt weighing heavily on her chest. If only they knew the truth. Her office was simple but cozy. A pile of folders awaited her on the desk. Lily took a deep breath and got to work. The hours flew by as she buried herself in reports, projects, and budgets. In the middle of the afternoon, James appeared at the door, his face an expression of indifference. "How's it going?" he asked dryly. "Well," Lily replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm learning quickly." James nodded. "Good. We have a meeting with the major donors tomorrow. I hope you're prepared." Before Lily could respond, he was already gone. She sighed, knowing the coming months would be difficult. Weeks passed, and Lily found herself immersed in a completely new world. She visited social projects, attended meetings with business people and politicians, and learned more about management than she had ever imagined. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The suspicious looks from the older staff members, the nasty comments she overheard in the corridors, these constantly reminded her that she was an outsider in this world. One afternoon, while visiting a shelter for underprivileged children, Lily felt a wave of nausea. Her pregnancy, now in its 3rd month, was becoming more evident. She ran to the nearest bathroom, and when she came out, she found one of the shelter's children looking at her curiously. "Are you sick, miss?" the little girl asked. Lily smiled, gently touching her belly. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to have a baby." The little girl's eyes lit up. "That's so cool. I wish I had a mommy who was having a baby." Lily's heart tightened. That child, like so many others the foundation helped, didn't have a family. And here she was, about to have a child, but surrounded by lies and secrets. That night, at home, Lily couldn't sleep. The little girl's words echoed in her mind. She got up and went to the mirror, observing her growing belly. "I need to be better," she whispered to her reflection. "For you, my baby, and for all those children." The following months were a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. Lily dedicated herself wholeheartedly to the foundation, determined to honor the trust Edward had placed in her. She faced resistance from some board members who saw her as an opportunist. But slowly, through hard work and innovative ideas, Lily began to earn the respect of many. One of her most ambitious projects was creating a professional training program for young people from disadvantaged communities. It wasn't easy to get support and resources, but Lily was persistent. "These young people need a real chance," she argued in a tense meeting with the donors. "Not just charity, but opportunity. To her surprise, it was James who supported her. "My father always believed in giving people the means to help themselves," he said. "I think Lily is on the right track." That moment marked a small change in their relationship. Although there was still tension and unspoken truths, they began working together more harmoniously. As her belly grew, Lily could no longer hide the pregnancy. Rumors spread quickly. Some judged her, others supported her. But Lily kept her head high, focused on her work. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting, James found her alone in the office. "How are you handling all of this?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Lily sighed. "One day at a time. It's not easy, but I'm trying to do the right thing." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken words and hidden truths. "Lily," James began hesitantly, "I know we have a lot to work through, but if you need anything, for you or the baby, you can count on me." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. It was the first time James had mentioned the baby directly. "Thank you," she whispered. As the year drew to a close, Lily looked back and could hardly believe all that had happened. The foundation was thriving under her leadership. Her relationship with James, though complicated, had improved, and she was about to give birth. But there was still a shadow hanging over her. The truth about the baby's father, her initial motives for getting involved with Edward, everything still needed to come to light. As she prepared for the birth of her child, Lily knew that soon she would have to face all the consequences of her past actions. But now, after a year of hard work and personal growth, she felt stronger and ready to face whatever the future held.